Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to begin by stating that I stand to oppose the bill in its entirety. I will start with the principal object of the bill, Mr. Speaker. I have a problem with the principal object of the bill. The principal object of the bill is stated to be operationalization of private-public partnerships in the water sector. Mr. Speaker, we in Nairobi here have had a taste of perhaps the most famous public-private partnership in the country today, and that is the expressway between Mlolongo and Westlands. Many of the people who can afford to use a toll road will tell you that it has improved their lives. But for the many people in Nairobi who cannot afford to pay toll, I can tell you that the feedback is that the expressway has actually made commuting between Mlolongo and Westlands on the old road extremely difficult and even harder than it was before the expressway was built. Mr. Speaker, this is in addition to a debate we had here last year where the public had to fork out extra money. I think it was about 19 billion shillings for the rehabilitation of the old Mombasa Road. This is after the private partnership was already in operation and the people with money were enjoying the services of the expressway because they could afford it. Mr. Speaker, I am not against privatization per se, and privatization is not bad in every instance. But I honestly believe that there are some sectors and some things that we should not privatize because of the negative effect it has on the public sector delivery of those same services. I remember when privatization of education began, and many will argue for and against privatization in the education sector. But the general consensus, at least from my perspective, is that it has had a negative effect on service delivery in the public sector. Mr. Speaker, it is also arguable whether privatization of healthcare has resulted in better services, especially in the public sector. Anytime you introduce commercial interest in essential services, Mr. Speaker, the public service, the free service always suffers. So here we are discussing privatization in the water sector. Privatization in the water sector, for me, is undesirable for many reasons. But, Mr. Speaker, those who said water is life knew what they were talking about. If you cannot afford water, you basically cannot afford life. If we are going to be made to pay for life, which is essentially what we are being told is going to happen with the privatization of water, then we are making life itself more expensive and more unbearable. I will give you the example of the water demand in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker. As of March 2022, our daily demand in Nairobi is 810 million liters per day. Mr. Speaker, this is against the installed supply capacity of 550 liters a day. We have a deficit of 260 million liters for the residents of Nairobi. Now, you imagine, Mr. Speaker, a situation where at least this 550 million liters of water a day is assured, not even assured, at least it is there on paper for the people of Nairobi. Now, with the passage of this bill, because it is assured because it is in the hands of the public sector, it is in the hands of Nairobi City Water Sewerage Company, which is an entity owned by the county government of Nairobi, which is an entity that belongs to the people of the county of Nairobi. Now, this bill passes and it says that a private entity, people with capacity and money, people with muscle, can be able to come and say, out of the 550 liters of water that Nairobi gets a day, we have the capacity to buy half of that amount of water. Say 200 million liters per day goes with a private entity because that is what you have empowered them to do through the bulk purchases that are being proposed in this amendment. What that does is that the public can only rely on Nairobi Water to supply 300,000 liters of water per day because 200,000 are now in the hands of a private company. Then what happens to that private company? Those private companies will not prioritize the majority of the people of Nairobi who cannot afford to buy water, even at the current rates that have been imposed by the Nairobi City County Water and Sewerage Company. Mr. Speaker, you will be commercializing life itself in this city so that those with the capacity to buy the water, just like the people who can be able to afford to fly over the poor on the expressway in Nairobi are doing right now, will be able to purchase all the water that is available in Nairobi, and the people will suffer, the ordinary people who are the majority in this county. Mr. Speaker, this is why I'm saying that this is one of those areas that should not be commercialized, that in fact it is an essential service. You must distinguish between essential services and other services. The people of Nairobi can survive in traffic, but you cannot survive without water, Mr. Speaker. Number two, there is no provision, having painted that picture, Mr. Speaker, there is no provision that will then determine that or put in place a mechanism for equity. Yes, you have the financial muscle to buy all the water in Nairobi, but should we allow you to do it because you have the capacity to do it? What happens to all the other people who are not able to be loaded onto this private entity that will be supplying water? So the equity mechanism, I don't see it in the bill. It would have been nice if they were told that for you to get that commercial enterprise, you must develop extra capacity. Extra capacity has to be developed first before we give you contracts to supply water commercially. But if they are coming to eat into the already or the current installed capacity, which I've already demonstrated to you, already has a deficit, then we are going to have problems, Mr. Speaker. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I had opportunity to have a conversation at some point with the Director General of the Nairobi City Water County, Water and Sewerage Board, Engineer Muguna. And he tried to explain to me, now that this is already a scarce commodity, how do you determine who gets water and who doesn't? And there is a very complex matrix that they use there, Mr. Speaker. Of course, you will see that they will prioritize important security installations. They will prioritize the CBD because they want to encourage businesses to happen. You don't want major conferences happening at, say, the KICC, international conferences, and then there's no water in the CBD. You don't want to have a situation that you don't have water at your international airports, for instance. You have seen the outrage that follows when there is a blackout at JKIA. The same for water, because it's an essential commodity. And then you come to the regions in Nairobi. Who gets water on which day? Who doesn't get water on what day? Because we are already facing a deficit, Mr. Speaker. So this commercialization, I believe, is going to make Engineer Muguna's work even worse. If you take away any single drop of water from the capacity that is installed right now, the people at Nairobi Water are going to have a problem on who gets water on which days and who doesn't get water, and there are going to be people who will not get water at all, simply because the commercial interests, the commercial entities that will be running that water supply will be determining who gets that water, and it is going to be a commercial relationship. If you have the money, you will get the water every time in the quantities that you want. But if you are not able to afford, you are on your own. Fourthly, Mr. Speaker, there is a concern about the loss of revenue to the entities that are owned by the county government. Mr. Speaker, loss of revenue also translates to loss of jobs. Many workers currently working at the county-owned water services companies are concerned, Mr. Speaker, that once you shift a bulk of the supply of water to private hands, there is no guarantee that their jobs will continue to be tenable. It is very possible that we are staring at job losses. And there is no mechanism in the bill, as currently drafted, Mr. Speaker, to ring fence or to protect the people currently working at Nairobi Water and Sewerage Company, so that after these commercial contracts have been signed, after the water is now in private hands, after these private companies are the ones running the water business, is there any guarantee that the people working for the Nairobi County Water and Sewerage Company will continue to be in employment? I have not seen that assurance in the bill. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, the question of infrastructure that has been touched on by some of my colleagues. We have already worked and invested a lot of money as a county in Nairobi to put in place the infrastructure, not just for the collection of water, but actually for the distribution of water. Is there any provision in the bill that assures us that the commercial interests, the commercial companies, once they take over the bulk water, will develop their own distribution infrastructure? Will that infrastructure be flying on top of our existing infrastructure the way that the expressway does? What is it going to do to the infrastructure that already exists. If there are disruptions in service because of ongoing construction of parallel infrastructure, who is going to bear the cost of repairs? Are we going to be told again as taxpayers in Nairobi to bear the cost of repairs to our existing infrastructure because of construction of new infrastructure, just like we were told to bear the cost of repairing the old Mombasa Road? I have not been assured in the current bill that any of those things have been thought about. Mr. Speaker, I had my governor, Johnson Sakaja, just recently in a church service, saying that we have secured as a city 15 billion shillings for new water projects, which is to increase the capacity of the city county to be able to provide this precious commodity. I don't know where that leaves us. Is this 15 billion shillings supposed to be for the people of Nairobi, for the development of the capacity of Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company, or we are doing this so that we can be able to enable private entities to come in as suppliers of water? Mr. Speaker, there's a project that is ongoing called the Northern Collector Tunnel. At the completion of the first phase, we are expecting an additional 140 million liters of water per day. That is going to maybe dent the deficit of 220 million liters a day by about half. There is still need for development of further capacity for the people of Nairobi to enjoy water on a daily basis in the quantities that they desire. What is going to happen if this bill becomes law? Mr. Speaker, I want to stop there because I am not convinced. I am not convinced, in addition to the questions raised by my colleagues about the fact that this being a devolved function, the national government is overreaching. It's overreaching in its attempt to manage the water sector, yet the fourth schedule of the Constitution specifies water and water services as a devolved function. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I stand to oppose the bill in its entirety, and I've heard people telling us that if you are unhappy with provisions of the bill, you can bring amendments. I am one of those people who has brought amendments to bills that I thought were unfavorable, unconstitutional, and overreaching in their provisions. But those very same amendments have been defeated here. And the question I'm asking myself, how do you amend something that is fundamentally flawed from the beginning? I want to convince my colleagues that please don't tell us to amend something that is unconstitutional. You don't amend something that is unconstitutional to make it constitutional. You throw it away, you throw it out. That is the only solution for unconstitutional provisions of a bill that, such as the one that we are dealing with here. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Sifuna. Senator Roba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to weigh in on this